Hi everyone, Bob here. So today we're going to be looking at the construction of a Larp safe hammer. Here's one I made earlier. This is a two-handed hammer. What we're going to be doing today is actually a single-hander, but the principles are going to be almost exactly the same. You just need to scale it up if you wanted to do a two-hander. Obviously you can see this hasn't been latexed at the moment. But what I'm actually going to be doing is latexing quite a few weapons all at the same time. It just saves me time to do that. So let's crack on and make a hammer. Right, so for this build I'm going to be using a 12mm fiberglass core, as you can see here. So the reason I'm using a 12mm is it's just going to be a stiffer handle, essentially. You don't want the thing to be too springy. I have used an 8mm in the past, and to be quite honest with you, it was borderline passing weapons check because of it makes the hammers whippy. These hammers are going to be, well, this hammer, I'm going to be doing a hammer and an axe actually out of this one piece, are going to be probably a bit longer than those ones, so you need a thicker core. So these are actually going to be right on the edge of a single-handed weapons size for Empire, which is 42 inches. So the first thing to do is to measure out your core and cut it to size. So when you're measuring your core, you need to also take into account putting a tip on your weapon. So the tip either end of your core needs to be at least an inch of foam. So the maximum size for a single-handed weapon in Empire is 42 inches. So we want to measure back to about 40 inches. It's fine if you go under, but you don't want to really go over. So I'm just going to mark 40 inches there. There we go. And then I'm going to cut this down. Once I've done that, I'll be back. Okay, so I've cut the fiberglass rod down to size now. So this is 40 inches long, and on top of this we're going to add a 1-inch tip to either end, which will make it up to 42 inches, which is the maximum length of a single-handed weapon in Empire. Okay, so we're going to start the process of tipping the weapon. So what I've got here is essentially Kevlar tape. It really isn't very expensive, but this is the stuff you're really going to need to put a good safe tip on your weapons. It's £3 or £4 for a metre or so. And I will try and put a link in the description underneath to the supplier that I use for this. I'll do that afterwards. The only problem with this stuff is actually cutting it. It is designed, funnily enough, not to be cut. So actually cutting this stuff can be quite difficult. You can buy special shears that will do the job for you. I do find that a really sharp knife or a good pair of scissors will cut this to length. So this is a 75mm thick piece, and essentially what we're going to do, we're going to attach a piece of foam to either end of the core, and then wrap it in the Kevlar, which will basically stop that tip from moving away from the end, and stop any if for whatever reason it does get thrust, you do thrust with this weapon, although you mustn't, it'll stop the end of the rod coming out of the foam and doing somebody any damage. This is far more important when you're doing a sword or a thrust safe weapon. Not quite so important when you're doing an axe, where these aren't going to actually be anywhere near the striking surfaces, but you still need to do it just to make sure, one, you comply with the regulations of your Larp, and two, you don't injure anybody. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut a couple of pieces of this, and then we're going to start tipping. Okay, so we're now going to start to put these tips onto the core. Okay, so obviously make sure you're wearing your gloves and a mask, because the glue is quite a nasty stuff. Don't really getting it on your hands or even breathing it in, so make sure that you've got your mask on. Right, so this is the glue I'm going to be using today. This is Fix. It's very similar to the other glues you might have seen me use. It's just that this one's a little bit thicker, and it stops the drips that you might get. So I'm going to go ahead and put the tips on these weapons now. Okay, so we're now going to start to put these tips onto the core. Okay, so obviously make sure you're wearing your gloves and a mask, because the glue is quite a nasty stuff. Don't really getting it on your hands or even breathing it in, so make sure that you've got your mask on. Right, so this is the glue I'm going to be using today. This is Fix. It's very similar to the other glues you might have seen me use. It's just that this one's a little bit thicker, and it stops the drips that you might get. So I'm going to go ahead and put the tips on these weapons now. Right then, so let's open this up. Right, so the stuff does stink a bit, so like I said before, make sure you've got your mask on. I'm just looking for my scraper, which I seem to have lost. Not a problem, I'll just get a scrap bit of foam, which will do the same job. Okay, so you just want to make sure that you're coating every surface that has to come together. So with the tape, try and get your glue, just go in the same direction as the grain of the weave. The only reason you want to do that is because if you go against it, the actual tape itself will start to fall apart, because it is just woven, and with the ends that are open, it will just start to unravel, so you do have to be a little bit careful with that. Okay, so basically everything that is going to get glued together, sorry, putting it under the camera there. Everything that needs to be glued together, make sure it gets a good coat, and essentially you just have to leave it to dry then. As I've explained before, I'm not going into all the ingredients. There's another video that I've done which will go through that for you, so please check out my other videos. They are quite long. Hopefully this one is going to be considerably shorter, because I've already gone through many of the principles that are required to construct weapons. A lot of the things that you need to know are all exactly the same. So once you can apply it to one type of weapon or a shield, you can do the same thing. You can apply the same technique and the same method with everything, to be honest. Okay. So as I say, make sure the glue is right the way around the whole tip, and it's covered both pieces of your Kevlar. Leave the glue back on, and then we're just going to wait a second for that to dry. Right, the glue has dried enough now for us to actually put these tips on. So just essentially dab that onto the end there, and then take your piece of Kevlar tape and then just position it so it's to the end of the bit of foam, and then tightly wrap that all the way around. And give it a good squish in. And then the same for the other end. So take a piece of foam, just make sure it attaches really well onto the end there. Peel up your Kevlar, and again attach it, and then make sure it's a tight wrap all the way around. And of course trim off any little bits that are just sticking out, just to neaten it up. I know no one will see it, but you know, it just means that you're not, these little bits can just get stuck in your glue and it's not great. So there we go. That is the core tipped. I'm just going to leave that to dry just for a minute or two before we go on to the next thing that we're going to be doing, and that is wrapping it in the foam. Right, okay, so you can see that now I've just cut a piece of foam ready for sticking it to the core. So what I've got here is some 3mm foam. Now this is really good when you're making things like axes and hammers and spears, because what we're actually going to do is we're going to actually roll the core into the foam, rather than the way we would do it with a sword would be meant to make a sandwich. And the reason for this is going to give us a round, obviously a round shaft, which is going to be like a wooden handle, rather than a flat thing that you're going to need for your blade. Alright, so it is two different techniques, and like I said before, I will eventually get round to making a sword. So the other good reason for doing this technique is the surface area that attaches to the round core. It's far stronger because every single inch of the core is going to get some contact with the foam, which means that it's just going to be a completely stronger construction than a flat one. Right, so first things first, we're going to have to cover the core and obviously the foam with the glue. So I am using the same glue again, and I am going to be using a glue spreader for this, but you know, you don't need one of these, just any old bit of old foam will do. It's just that this tends to make it go a little bit further. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and glue this up. I'm not going to film it. You've seen me gluing in and showing you the basics of gluing in other videos. So once I've got the glue on the core and the foam, I'll come back and show you the next step. Okay, so I've now got glue on the foam and the core. So essentially we're just going to have to just start rolling it. So just make sure that your core is fully covered on all areas. You also might notice I've got a little bit of an overlap either end. It just means that I'm guaranteed to get the foam right to the ends of the tips, and I can trim that off afterwards. I do apologise. I'm going to close the door for a second. I do apologise for the noise that you might hear in the background. It is a school next door that is being demolished. So that is what that is, if you were wondering. Which, to be honest with you, you're probably not. So as you roll, it's really important that you make sure that the foam is absolutely seated right onto that core. All right, you do not want any air bubbles So just make sure that you really press quite firmly as you roll it. Okay, so the foam's now gone around the core once, and as you may know already, so if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that contact adhesive has to be on both sides of the surface that you're gluing for it to work. So once you've gone one full rotation round the foam, you then need to coat essentially the back side of the foam. So I'll just demonstrate it really, because it just makes more sense rather than me trying to explain. But essentially what you need to do is to cover the rolled up bit of foam with glue. So this is quite a different technique than you would use for making a sword. Personally, I actually prefer making hammers and axes, pole weapons, that sort of thing. That's my bag, I guess. There are other people who make swords, and they are absolutely superb at it. There's a friend of mine at Empire who is in Navarre. I won't mention him by name just in case he gets embarrassed or doesn't want his name mentioning, but he makes some absolutely fantastic stuff. He's also a weapons checker, and I've spent the last couple of events annoying the shit out of him, so I do apologise, mate, but he's given me some absolutely fantastic advice. He's a great weaponsmith. He makes some fantastic stuff, and he makes some brilliant swords. I've seen a couple of cookeries that he's made which just look absolutely fantastic. However, my thing is more to do with like axes and hammers. I do really enjoy making those. I've also got a commission on, which you may be interested in. I can't post any videos of that because the person who has commissioned it wants it to be a surprise, so that's all I can say about that one. I may film it because actually it's a really interesting design that this gentleman has come up with that he wants, and a really brilliant theme. So I may film it, and then once the commission has been handed out and the people who it was intended for have had it, then I might release the video afterwards on how I did it, because I think it's going to be quite an interesting build to do. But that's going to be down the line of it. Right, so now I've got more glue on the rest of the shaft. To be honest with you, by the time I've got to that end gluing, this end's dry, so I'm just going to give it, and it's quite hot at the moment, so this is going to dry really quickly. But essentially what I need to do now is just roll it again, and we just keep doing that until we've built up the thickness of the foam around the handle that is required. Okay, so here we go again, and again it's the same technique. You just roll it until you've got to the next bit where the glue is stuck, and again you really need to make sure that you've got no air bubbles in it. If you do have any air bubbles, you can actually get round it essentially by cutting into the bubble and possibly adding some glue in, but to be honest with you, it's a real faff, so yeah, try not to do that. Okay, so we've rolled a quarter way around, and we're going to have to add more glue. I'm not going to carry on filming this now because it just make the video that much longer, so you've got the idea, I think. So once I've fully rolled this, I'll come back and we'll carry on with the next. Okay, as you can see, I've now fully wrapped the core in the foam. So 3mm thick. I've done 4 full turns. So that gives me 12mm of foam all the way round the core, which is plenty. You can't feel the core through the foam, which is the essential part of a weapons check. Alright, so there's no place where you can feel the core. you just squishy foam. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to cut this off and then glue, put a little bit of dab of glue along the edge to finish this off. So there'll be a little bit of dab of glue now just to seal the edge off. And once we've done that, I just need to leave it to dry for a little while, and then we'll essentially blend in this edge into the foam of the handle. Try not to get too much onto the rest of the handle if you can. It's going to take a little while just to get tacky. Right, so it's all trimmed up now. I'm just going to give it the join a light sand by hand. Now, if you were if this was meant to be like a steel or metal shaft to a weapon, you would need to blend this in much better than I'm going to bother doing. So you'd have to probably use your belt sander to get a better finish on it, and then after that run your heat gun over it. But as this is going to be a wooden shaft, this join will be hidden within the wood grain. So I only need to give it a light sanding and then run the heat gun over it just to blend it in enough so that when you put the wood grain into it, it will essentially disappear and you won't be able to see the join. So something else I've done as well with this is I've actually trimmed the ends up. So I don't know whether you can see that. Maybe you can. There you go. So that shows you the roll essentially of the foam around the core. So that bit in the centre there is foam, and that's the top of the tip. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to cap both the ends with a circle of foam, which will be a piece of 10mm foam, which will just mean that the tip is well protected. Bear in mind though, the overall length still needs to be under 42 for it to be a legal single-handed weapon for Empire. Again, if you're attempting a different type of LARP, just check with the rules of that LARP for weapon lengths. Otherwise, if you're slightly over and someone checks the length of your weapon, you may be forced to use it with two hands rather than one. Right, okay, so the handle has now been fully glued, tipped, it's the right length. So the next thing we're going to do is put some wood grain onto this. So it's really easy. All you need is a soldering iron. The cheaper the better, to be quite honest with you, because the foam is pretty much going to ruin it. So you don't want to spend a lot of money on a fancy one. So to start off with doing the wood grain, what I like to do is put some points in where the knots from the branches that might have been coming out of this piece are going to be, and as I do it, you'll see why I do that later on. So bearing in mind that you're going to have a head up here somewhere, you're going to have some wrap down here somewhere. So the knots, if you want them to be seen, are going to have to be sort of in the middle of the So just take your soldering iron and carve into it little circles like this. You want a dot in the centre and then a little sort of oval circle around it. So just move it over so that you don't want these in line because you want it to look natural. And again, you can do a little circle around it, maybe 2 if you want a slightly bigger branch that's come off in that area. They don't need to be particularly accurate because it's reflecting a natural piece of wood. So you know, nothing square or in nature. So you just want to make these you know, natural looking. Alright, just bear in mind, of course, obviously the soldering iron is hot, so just be careful with it. Make sure you keep your other hand out of the way while you're doing it. I think probably one more, probably too low, probably one more there. So again, put a little dot in the centre, hopefully you can see this. Put a little dot in the centre and then just go round it in a circle. The other thing is, don't be afraid of going too deep with your detail work with your soldering iron. The latex will naturally fill up the holes, so what you'll be left with is like more of a depression than a deep cut. So really, you can go quite deep with your design, and it won't seem so stark when you've got the latex on, because, like I said, it will fill up the holes quite a bit actually. So you do need to go quite deep for the detail to come out. So once you've got your knots where you want them, then you need to start putting the lines in. So start at one end and keep your soldering iron at a slight angle and just carefully drag it down. Don't go too slowly, else it will burn through too many layers, and don't go too quick, else you'll get as it won't go deep enough. So just a steady line. It doesn't have to be straight, because again the grain of wood is not straight. So when you get close to a knot that you've made, what you're going to want to do is to choose one side or the other that the line is going to follow the knot round. So I'm going to go to the left with this one. So as you approach the knot, bring it out, go around the edge of the knot, bring it back in, and then back to your sort of straight-ish line, and carry on down the end, all the way to the bottom of the piece. And bearing in mind, you're going to cover quite a lot of this up with sort of a leather hand wrap, and then obviously the top of the hammer at the other end. But do the grain over the whole piece. Don't try and go, oh, we've got the head of the hammer's going to be there. I won't put any wood grain on it, because it can look like, if you don't get it quite right, then it can look quite false. You want the wood grain to appear to be going underneath the metal hammer head, which looks far more natural. So you then want to, another quick tip is, don't go straight into your next line. Give your soldering iron a little bit of time to reheat before you start the next line, because as you're doing it, it does lose heat, especially if it's not a very expensive one like this one. It's not very powerful. Just give it time to get back to its maximum temperature before you start the next line. So you want it about, well, you can go between, I would say, 5mm to 10mm apart, depending on how much detail you want. I'm going to row around about 5mm. And again, you don't need to be absolutely straight. In fact, you don't want to be absolutely straight. You know, your line can wiggle in and out a bit. It just makes the grain of the wood look much more natural. You know, slow down, speed up. Just make sure you've got the right depth. So as we come to this knot again, now this time we're going to go around the other side of the knot, and you're going to come out at a reasonable distance and go back in. And then carry on all the way down. Right, I'll do one more. Again, they're about 5mm-ish apart. You can come in, go closer, go out again. You do want to do that actually. It just makes the grain look more natural. What you don't want is perfectly straight lines which are all the same distance apart, because it will just look odd. So come in and then follow the line round on the next one out, but try and smooth that curve slightly more than the previous one, so that eventually when you get to perhaps the third or fourth line out, that line is then straight again. So hopefully you get the idea. So this next one that's coming up, so we've done that knot there, there's another knot coming up. So I'll have a choice then to go that side of it or that side, and both are fine, you can do either one. I'll probably come this side of it for one more line, and then the next one after that I'll go the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and finish wood graining this piece up, and then once I've done that I'll join you again. Blocks of 10mm thick foam that I've cut into 4" by 3" blocks. So what I will do is I'll glue these together, which will form the most basic part of the hammer head. This is going to be a double-headed hammer, so there'll be one for either side, and then once they're glued in place there'll be a layer of leather that goes across here, which will be for strength, and then on top of that then there will go a final piece, something like that, on the top. Once we've done that, there'll be 2 ends to go on either end, and then finally on those then we'll attach the furniture foam. So I'm going to go and glue these up, glue these blocks up, and then glue them to the head, and then once I've done that I'll show you the next stage. Okay, so now I've glued the first 2 blocks in place on the head of the hammer. I've cut out the 2 long cap pieces. There'll be 2 sort of decorative pieces which I'll put on later in the centre. But the next stage is reinforcing this head. So what I've got here are 2 pieces of leather. These have been cut from an old sofa. You know, it's just really cheap leather. But what this does, it provides a really strong attachment between the blocks and the shaft, the handle. If you don't do this, what will happen is you in combat the head can be easily ripped off. So we're going to put 2 reinforcing strips, one either side. So just cut them slightly smaller than the foam block. So one either side, and then that gets sandwiched in between the next layer as well. This means it just contours the shaft there. What else we'll be doing is we'll be adding a little bit of leather to the this area here. And the reason we're going to be doing that is because what you find is that very often, particularly with swords and perhaps even spears, you'll hook those with your axe, and this is appropriate for axes as well as hammers. You'll hook it with your axe or hammer, and then to move the sword out of the way. But if this area is not reinforced here, what will happen is it will tear the head off your axe or hammer. So we reinforce that with leather. You could do it with Kevlar as well if you wanted to, though Kevlar tends to, once it's impregnated with a glue, be quite stiff. So you actually do want a little bit of flexibility. So I find that leather works far better than Kevlar. So right, I'm going to glue this up, and then once I've done that, I will do the other side, and we can crack on with putting the heads on the hammer. So Right, so I'm just gluing up the leather. So I've put some glue on that side. I'm now going to give a coat of glue to this side of the hammer head. So although the leather doesn't come to the edges, do go right to the edges with your glue because you're going to be attaching another piece across the top. And make sure you get a nice even coat all the way across to the edges, including the section in the middle. Make sure you've got glue all the way over there. Okay, so just give that a second or two to dry. Right, so with the leather, what you want to do is actually start, so position it so it's where it's going to go, but where you want to press first, oh, you can see that, so where you want to press first is actually in the centre, so just make sure you've got it where it needs to go, and then press in the centre so it forms around the wooden handle first, and really get it pressed right in there. Okay, and then press it down onto the sides of the head. The idea is that when we've got the next piece on, it will look like the head is metal and has been forged essentially with a hole in the centre, rather than just layers of foam that have been glued together. That's the idea anyway, so that it forms a tight fit. Also, if you leave gaps here, what will happen is the latex will try and fill it when you start latexing it, and it'll pool, and it'll do all sorts of stuff. So there we go, that's fine. I'm going to complete the one side fully before moving on to the next side. So once that's glued, you're now going to apply another layer of glue, this time on top of the leather, and make sure you do get right to the edge again. And the weather is quite hot at the moment when I'm making these, so the actual gluing time is quite short at the moment, the time for the glue to dry. Obviously in colder temperatures you want to give it a little bit longer to dry before you start sandwiching your pieces together. But by the time I've finished the one end, the other end's dry really with this. It is very hot. It's the summer of 2018 if anybody's interested. England has just been knocked out of the World Cup. So yeah, not so good, but it's very, very hot. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that to dry for a second before I carry on, and I'll be back in just a moment. Enough. There we go. And really give that a really good press down. Okay, so that's about it. So what I'm going to just do now is just trim up the ends, so yeah, the faces are all even. And once we've done that, we'll go on to the next stage, which is putting on the end caps, which are going to be made out of furniture foam. Right, so the next stage, as you can see, I've made these, which are, I believe, called languettes. I'm sure somebody will put in the comments that I've said that wrong, but essentially what they are in the original hammer axe would be metal pieces that help attach the axe head to the shaft. So obviously you can see these are just foam, but they all give the image of you know, of that being the case. The reason I didn't do it where I could have done one piece of foam that came down like that, the reason I didn't do it is for two reasons. First of all, to save foam, because you'd have had to cut a T-piece out and whatever. I could cut these from a couple of scrap pieces that I had from something else. And the other, when you're, this is not an exact science getting this in the right place, so I would have to then make sure that was absolutely perfect to line up with the centre of the handle. And to be quite honest with you, I'm not that good, so I didn't do that. I just added it on afterwards. The join you'll hardly see, to be honest with you. Once you've got some latex over that, you won't see it. These little bits here to represent nails or screws, nails I guess, and square-headed nails are absolutely fine. If you're a blacksmith, you'll know that. But yeah, one of the easiest nails to form is a square-headed one, rather than a round-headed one. So I'm just going to glue the other side on now. These won't actually provide any structure, any strength to the hammer at all. They're purely decorative. All the strength comes from the leather reinforcement that we've already put in the head. It will, yeah, I've lost a name. It will just stiffen up the top part of the hammer. Lost a nail. It will stiffen up the top part of the hammer slightly. Not a great deal, but that would be about it, to be honest with you. I wouldn't get anything more from that. It's purely decorative. Obviously the original ones would be very practical, but in this one it's just to make it look more realistic. I just need to know where I've got to put the glue to. I don't want to overlap too far with the glue. You don't really want to be latexing over areas of glue if you can avoid it. The latex doesn't take very well to the glue. It goes on, but it doesn't. It's not very good. So try and avoid where you can getting glue on areas that you're not going to latex, that you want to latex. Sorry, if you're not latexing a particular area, then it's fine. But of course, everything's going to get latex. So. I don't even know why I said that. There we go. So that's already dry. I'll add this side on. So we're now going to cut out the heads of the hammer. So you may notice we're going to be using a different type of foam for this. So this is, well, it's essentially a sofa cushion, but what it is, it's low density foam. It's squishy sponge. So when you're hitting someone with a hammer, similar to a spear, there's quite a large surface area that you're going to be hitting someone with, and the foam behind it is quite hard. So you need a soft pad on the top of the hammer to make sure that no one gets injured when you whack them with it. So for cutting this stuff, again I'm going to be using my retractable knife. I've changed the blade. This is a brand new blade because this blunts the blade really quickly. So if you want to get a nice clean straight cut on this, you do need a fresh blade. Okay, so I've already marked it out. I'm going to go ahead and cut out the heads now. There we go. Let's move that out of the way. should be the same size, yep, as the backing blocks. So just put that straight down the middle. I'm just going to tidy that edge slightly. Okay, so that's the two foam blocks. So essentially what's going to happen now is I'm going to glue those each to these blocks here, and then in turn they will glue to the face of the hammer. Okay, so I'm going to go and glue those up. There's a little bit more work to do on those before we actually attach them, but I'll glue those up and come back to you. Okay, so the next stage is to just put an edge around the blocks for the heads of the hammers. So I've glued the furniture foam to the backing, which is obviously the higher density foam, and now I'm going to glue around the edge a piece of leather, and the reason that we do that is for exactly the same reason as we put the leather on the head of the hammer, and it's just to give it some reinforcement and just to make sure that that the low density foam doesn't come away from the higher density foam that is the backing. So a little bit of glue all around the edge. So while that first one's drying, get the glue on this one. Try and avoid doing that. So you want to do exactly what I did. You don't want to do exactly what I did there, which was just get a little bit too much glue. And we've got a little bit on the surface there, which is unfortunate. But it's not the end of the world. So we leave that one dry first, and now to edge it. So I start the edging on a side that's going to eventually be the bottom of the hammer. It just means that you're less likely to see that. And again, I apologise for the terrible noise, is because, as I said before, there's a school being demolished next door to where I live. So I don't know whether you can hear that in the background, but as I say, apologies if you can. My shed is in my garden, and the school's right next. Well, the school was right next door. Not anymore, to the delight of all the local kids. Unfortunately, there is a new one that they've all got to go to. So, you know. There you go. That's one. And now the other one, and the same. So you want to start the edge where it's going to appear. The join, sorry, where it's going to appear least, and that's obviously on the bottom. Okay, so remember that the sponge sides are the sides that are going to actually be the head of the hammer. God, my Midlands accent came out a bit then, didn't it? The hammer. Yeah, so they're going to be the striking surfaces. So try not to get too much glue on those. The other side then is going to have glue on it, and then they will be attached to the hammer. So you may have noticed that the hammer head has got slightly shorter, and the reason for that is when I sort of was dry fitting these on the end, it just seemed too long. And I may have mentioned this before in some of my other videos, until you actually make the thing and start putting it together, you know, your sizes on paper might look absolutely fine, but once you've got them together and you start fitting things together, then you look at it and you think to yourself, well, actually that's out of proportion. So I've cut off a little bit off the end, each end of here, which will give it a more compact head. So as you can see, this is going to be a double-ended hammer. So yeah, I've just taken a bit off there. So one last bit of detailing on the top to do before I attach those on. and then there'll be a cap around the base there, just for added strength, and then that will probably be about it for the construction of this particular weapon. Okay, so I'll sort out the detailing for here, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I've now attached the two hammer heads, as you can see there. I've got attached on. I've also done, I made this raised section here, just to give it a bit more strength and to add some interest to that hammer head. And I've done a little bit of scroll work in the shape of a vine, which fits in with the brief of the nation that the person who's going to be wielding this hammer is in. So same on both sides, and that's essentially the hammer's head done. So the last bit of detail now will be going down this end, and there'll essentially be a little sort of shoe on the end there that just protects the butt of the weapon. Obviously it's going to be foam as well, but it'll be painted to look like metal. You can see the wood grain there, and to be honest, once I've done that, we'll be ready to latex it. So back in a bit. Right, so onto latexing. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but what I am going to just do, because it is slightly different to so the other builds that I've done, is the soft furniture foam end, and what you need to do with latex on that. But other than that, latexing is pretty much the same as it has been for the other projects. Okay, so get yourself a paint tray. You can use a jar if you want, but I'm using rollers and brushes, so I find this really handy. So the roller is going to be used for the vast majority of putting the latex on here. However, I am going to use a brush for the ends, and the reason for that is because essentially this is a sponge, so it's going to absorb an awful lot of latex. So it's just easier to brush it on, to be honest with you. And so let's just give it a go. So right then, so there's now about 10 layers of latex on the hammer. I've done slightly more on the head. There's about 12 layers on the foamy bits at the end there, just because it just absorbs the latex a little bit more. So a couple of extra layers just to give it a nice surface on there. So okay, so now we've got a black undercoat on the whole hammer. So the next stage is applying some colour to it. So I've got a couple of old Chinese meal plastic pots. They're great because you can throw them away afterwards. And I'm just going to mix up some colours now. So I want the head of the hammer to sort of have an ancient feel about it. So it's going to be a sort of bronze colour. So I'm going to use a mix of this sort of, well, these two colours, and a little bit of black, and then we'll get that onto the metal parts. Okay. Make sure there's no dry bits that you add in. You don't want any of those in there. And then a little bit of latex. Okay, so I've already got a little bit of black paint on my brush here, so that should just about be enough. I don't want it to be too dark, because the black undercoat will sort of show through in the first couple of layers. So as I've said before in previous videos, the colour that you actually get when you mix the paint into the latex is not the same colour that is going to actually end up. So just bear that in mind. Don't look at it and think, oh my goodness me, that's not the colour that I want. It will change as it dries. I apologise for the terrible noise in the background. They are still demolishing the school next door, so as I say, I'm sorry about that. It seems to be getting nearer actually. I hope they don't come into my shed. Right, okay, so that's mixed up there. So I'm going to initially brush this on, but then I will go over it with my roller after I've done that. So as this one has got a little bit of black in it, you just want to give it everywhere, all the metal parts, a really good coating all the way around. Don't worry too much about getting the colour on other areas at the moment, because obviously you're going to go over those later. Essentially you just want to get a first layer on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish off getting the paint on this one, and then when it's dried I'm going to show you the difference between the colour that you can see here, which is sort of greyish colour, and the actual colour that it dries, just so you can get an impression of the difference. So I'm going to finish this off and I'll be right back. Right, okay, so that's 2 coats of the bronze colour on, and it's now dry. So you can see straight away there's a massive difference between the colour that it started off as and the colour that we've got now. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a final highlight on this bronze colour. So that's going to be I'm going to be adding a little bit of silver paint to the bronze. So just keep the mix pretty much the same. There's probably enough latex in here already, to be honest with you. I don't need to add any more. I think a little bit more bronze. So what I'm doing now is I'm using a sponge, and this is going to be a highlight, so I'm just going to be dabbing this on with a sponge, and it's just going to be hitting the raised areas. That's the idea anyway. So it looks like that the raised areas are where obviously it's had wear and tear, and the recesses are where all the sort of dirt has accumulated over the centuries or whatever. So I'm just going to dab this in, and then I'm going to just start dabbing it on. So you want to be reasonably light with this. You don't want to be too heavy. Sort of try and pay attention to all the raised edges, okay, and any flat areas. So you can see that I've actually left a few black areas, and that's deliberate. It just adds a little bit of shade to the weapon. It's where naturally it's darkened. I think it looks quite good like that. I mean, you could just do a flat colour over the whole thing if you wanted. Nothing's stopping you doing that. It would look fine. It's just, this is my own personal preference, that's all. Okay. Right, okay, other end. Hope you can hear me because the noise outside. There we go. I'll leave that to dry, and then I'll come back and show you the next step. Okay, so the paint is now dry on the metal parts of the hammer. I think it's turned out quite well. I'm not sure whether I'm going to highlight this vine yet or just leave it metallic. I'm sort of thinking leaving it metallic at the minute. I'll decide on that later. But anyway, the next bit is to do the wood. So make sure you use a clean one, so a clean tub. And don't use any of the ones that you've used for the metallics. The reason being, you will get particles, even if you washed it out reasonably well, you're going to get particles of metallics in the tub, and you'll have sparkly bits on your wood. And unless that's actually an effect you're going for, it's best just to use a separate tub, just avoids all that. I've also got a clean brush as well, so I'm not using the same brush as I use for metallics, because however clean you get your brush, there's always some particles left in there. So I'm going to start with a dark brown colour, and of course some latex, and mix that up, and then I give the whole wooden part of the hammer a really good coat of this dark brown colour. So again, as you mix it, you just notice that it doesn't turn out dark brown, it's like a sort of light, sort of muddy brown really. But again, as it dries, it will go quite dark. There we go. It's just a small piece of wood exposed at the top. Right, and then for the rest. Try not to go right to the edges of the metal if you can, and leave a slight space where the black undercoat shows through. I think it just looks better. It sort of defines the area of the weapon. If you get any overspill, just quickly wipe it off with your finger, and that will work fine. Obviously at this stage you don't want to get any of this onto the metal parts. It'll be very difficult to get it off, and essentially probably have to repaint that section. There we go. And you can, once you're away from the metal bits, then you can just whack it on there. Just want a really good all over coat. And again, don't worry that it looks quite light. This will go quite a bit darker once it's dry. So I hope you can see what I'm doing there, but as you get close to your cap at the end, don't go right to the end, just leave a little bit of the black showing. If you want to, you can sort of smudge the end with your finger, and that will, oops, yeah, so if you want, you can just smudge the end with your finger, and that'll just blend in the colours between from one to the other. So I don't know, hopefully you can see what I'm doing. There you go, so you just blend in the end with your finger. Even on this bit, if you've got some bits of the grain that you haven't quite captured and it's actually black still, that's fine. It just adds to the wood effect. Okay. Right, so I'm going to hang that up to dry, and once it's dry, we'll come back and we'll do the next coat on top of that. Okay, so the dark brown is now dry, and we're going to do a lighter colour. So again, it's just a little bit of acrylic paint. So I'm not actually going to add any latex to this, because so this is purely a highlight. So what I'm going to actually be doing is dry brushing this on. Anybody who does miniatures painting will know what I mean by dry brushing, but if you don't, essentially what I'm going to do is put a little bit of paint on the brush and then wipe it off so that there's almost no paint left on the brush at all. So and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rub it over the wood grain just to pick out the well, just pick out the grain really. You will see that, well, you probably won't see that there's hardly any paint going on at all, and I'm brushing very lightly. It's easy to put more paint on, but you can't take it off once it's there. And also don't forget, as well, as the paint dries, it will go a little bit lighter. Obviously not as much as if you had latex in it, but there we are. So essentially that is pretty much finished. There's only one stage left to go with this now, and that's to isoflex it. I'm not going to be filming isoflexing it. If you want to see how I do that, go and have a look at my other video where I make a shield and I isoflex that. You know, I film myself doing that. Once you've seen it once, you don't need to see it again. It's just a waste of time. Yeah, that's about it. I will show you once it's finished, fully finished with the isoflex on, and you can have a look at it then. So just before I finish here though, I will just have a little word about what, I'm sure some of you have seen this, what this is here. So when you're latexing and painting, one of the hardest things to do is to get all round all the surfaces of the weapon without it sort of touching the bench or touching the floor. So what I do is I just put a little loop of masking tape around the handle underneath where the hand wrap's going to go. But to be honest with you, it's so thin you can't even see it, and it just comes out there. I make a little loop, and then I've got some hooks over there where I can hook it up. It's really, really handy. Once I'm done, I just cut that off. The masking tape just stays under there. You put the hand wrap on, and you would never know it was there. And that's a sort of just a little tip of making, you know, just makes it easier to handle and to hang them up. There's a couple of other methods you can use. You can use just a hook to hold them onto, or you know, if you've got two sort of metal prongs or something, you can hook it into. I just find that cheap, easy, and it doesn't really show after you've finished it. I mean, I could quite happily not put a wrap on that, and you wouldn't even know it was there. I mean, you would have a little knot there, but nothing major. So yeah, that's how I hang them up. Okay, so I'm just going to finish this off. We're going to get this isoflexed, and then you can have a look at it. Okay, so here's the finished thing. It's now fully isoflexed. Put a wrap on it, and yeah, it's pretty much done. So just a couple of things that you should just note about construction of these things. Right, so where you're doing the soft foam heads of the hammer, don't be tempted to squish them in before you've finished isoflexing and spraying it with silicone. And the reason for that is it will stick to itself, and you'll end up with the ends being having wrinkles in it. So don't do that. Just leave them alone. Don't squish them. And then once you're finished isoflexing, grab your soldering iron, heat it up, and put a hole, probably on the underside is best, in either end, and that just lets the air escape when it's squished. You know, so when you hit someone, it gives a lot more than it does now. So yeah, I've put a hand wrap on it, just a little bit of suede. And so actually a single-handed hammer. It's pretty much as big as you can get. It's not for me, it's for my son who's a lot stronger than I am, because to be honest with you, I'd probably have trouble wielding that myself on one hand, but he'll have no problem with it. Of course, there's nothing to say that although it is just under the 42 inches, you can quite happily wield it two-handed if you wanted to, if you're a smaller person. Like myself, I'd probably use two hands with that. But yeah, its regulation size is for a single-handed hammer. I'm really pleased with how it's turned out. So if you like the video, please be sure to put some comments below if there's anything you want to know. If there's anything I haven't explained fully in the video, put them in the comments and I'll try and get back to you. Please check out my other videos. Like I said, I've done a excuse me, a Larp safe shield. So there's two videos on that. First one is just about all the things you're going to need to make that, and the second one is actually about making the shield itself. I go through a lot of the techniques that you need to know for general making of weapons and shields and things in that video. So do check it out. And of course, please like and subscribe. And hopefully, if you end up at Empire, come and say hello. I'm in Navarre. I won't give you my character name, but I'm sure you'd recognise me even under all the war paint. So you know, do come down and say hi. Great. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I see you again next time.